Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our presentation of effective outreach strategies to BIPOC communities. My name is Kevin Williams. I'm the Dbsa Communications Vice President, and I'm joined by my colleagues Dante Freeman, who is our Senior Manager of Digital Communications, and Karen Fregoso, who is our Dbsa Social Media Coordinator. We're very excited, happy to be with you this afternoon, and really eager to share some of our insights and findings about how to put together an effective outreach plan to connect with BIPOC communities in your area. So as we go through this presentation, please save your questions, comments until the end. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation, and we welcome your insights, your questions, and your input at that time. So let's get started. Our agenda, we're going to cover the following areas. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of reaching out to BIPOC communities. We'll delve into the reasons why, starting with learning how to understand the communities that you and Dbsa National seeks to serve. And then we'll go into a more detailed outlook on the essential elements that make up an outreach plan for the BIPOC community. And we will, as I said before, finish with your questions. So we're eager to answer anything that you have at the end. Next, please. Why is it so important now to reach out to BIPOC communities? It helps us as much as Dbsa also wants to help BIPOC communities. Outreach to the BIPOC communities helps Dbsa National, it helps the chapters as well, because it broadens the mission that we all have to provide hope, help, support, and education to those who are living with mood disorders. And by focusing on BIPOC communities, it allows us the opportunity to engage with peers who come from what had been systematically underserved communities, communities that had limited access in the past to mental health resources. It helps Dbsa understand and address the systemic barriers that have kept BIPOC audiences historically from mental health care, issues such as stigma, distrust of the healthcare system, implicit bias and the role it plays, as well as an underrepresentation of BIPOC healthcare providers. And with all of this information, we hope that it empowers you, the chapter at the local level, with enough understanding so that you can have an impact in narrowing the existing mental health disparities that exist within your communities. Next. These days, it seems like we're all into a specific focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion over certainly the last 2 to 3 years. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a big instigator in sort of a rerouting of that focus. Pandemic uncovered a lot of the systemic barriers that we all began to learn had such an impact on the mental health of the general population and specifically BIPOC communities. We also saw during this time an explosive growth in things such as hate crimes, which helped to contribute to significant rises in suicide rates amongst representatives of BIPOC communities, for example, in the Black, Latina, and Asian American communities. Next. So let's spend a little bit of time over the next couple of minutes to talk more in detail about the mental health disparities and specifically how they affect specific BIPOC communities. Next, please. What we know from the work that we've done in looking at mental health disparities in BIPOC communities is that what we see generally is only a slight difference in the prevalence of mental health conditions amongst minority groups. However, the differences reveal themselves in the following ways. Amongst BIPOC communities, they are less likely to have access to general health care. They often receive poor or culturally incompetent care where clinicians and institutions don't quite know how to diagnose or how to treat members of BIPOC community because they don't quite understand how BIPOC communities approach and understand mental health care. There are off-sided barriers to treatment, such as stigma, which keeps members of BIPOC communities from not only acknowledging that they need help in this space, but refusing to get the help that they know that they need. And there's also mistrust and discrimination within the healthcare system itself. Affordability is also a big reason which keeps BIPOC communities from accessing mental health care. There's not enough data known because BIPOC communities are underrepresented generally in the research that's conducted on mental health. And often BIPOC members, when they do get treatment, it's at a much later stage than they should have. And often it results in worse outcomes that have to be because BIPOC members have waited so long to get the treatment that they needed. Next. Here's another slice of data that we think is really relevant in understanding the space that BIPOC members operate when it comes to mental health. This is information from a survey conducted just a couple of years ago on a reporting of adults who report symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you can see, the top three tiers in terms of the largest percentage of representatives who acknowledge anxiety or depressive disorder are all non-white communities, non-Hispanic, Black, or Hispanic or Latino. These happen to be the three largest percentages of groups that have reported living with conditions of anxiety or depressive disorder. And even if you go to the bottom of this chart and you see non-Hispanic Asian, even though that's the smallest number at 33.1%, looking at the trend line from previous years, 33% is a significant jump for the non-Hispanic Asian community over what it has been in previous decades. So this reveals to us that that the prevalence of mental health conditions for many BIPOC communities has risen substantially in the last few years. Even in more detail, for example, Black African Americans, 20% more likely to experience serious mental health symptoms than the general population, but only 1/3 who need the mental health care actually receive it. Asian and Pacific Islanders, suicide rates have increased by nearly 16% between 2018 and 19. And in this group, there's 3 times less likely than white community to seek mental health services. Amongst the Latina and Hispanic community, the barriers to mental health services, some are known, some are perhaps not so known, but it's language differences, the lack of insurance, and cultural stigma contribute to an inability to access mental health services. Next. As you, as representing chapters, you consider how to make connections to the BIPOC communities in your area. The work starts by understanding those communities that you want to serve and to learn about the issues, especially in the mental health space, that are important to them. It's also important to understand that successful outreach requires a plan to reach specific underserved communities with relevant, culturally competent content. And so that requires that even your BIPOC approach cannot be one size fits all, that it's important to take the time to do the homework to understand how each of these unique communities embraces and understands mental health and mental health services, and then to tailor your outreach to make sure that you're coming across to them in a relevant and credible manner. And that feeds into our last point here, which is about culturally competent community engagement. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. That has to become a priority because that's critical to building the bridges of trust that your chapter will need in order to work side by side with BIPOC organizations to deliver the services and resources that DBSA affords. Next. So we'll take now some time to talk about some of the specific steps that you can use in developing your outreach action plan. To, first of all, identify, it starts with identifying, as I said before, the underserved needs in your community. This is very important, it's critical, because it's going to show that, again, your chapter has done its homework and that you're coming in from a standpoint of knowledge and understanding, and probably even more importantly, that you're not coming in as know-it-all with all the answers and no need to talk to the community that you're seeking to help, because that's going to put up an immediate wall between you and those that you seek to help. So how do you identify these needs? You can conduct a mental health needs assessment that can require, for example, going down to the Census Bureau and understanding sort of the status of mental health, how it's delivered, who's receiving it now. And that'll give you an idea of where the needs, where the gaps might exist. It might also indicate some project needs as well as potential areas that in partnership with BIPOC communities, you can help address. You can collect and analyze some critical data, which will feed into your outreach plan. And you take all this information to put together a report which will inform an actual action plan of tactics and practices that you want to launch as part of your BIPOC outreach. Next. So specifically, what are some of the elements of the outreach plan? We include these as sort of the primary legs, if you will. Social media is so important, and Karen's going to go into a lot more depth about that. Earned media, partnering with various media within your community to help tell this story and to reach the broader BIPOC community. Culturally competent collateral materials. What sorts of marketing materials can you produce and distribute that you can put into the hands of the BIPOC communities to let them know more about what DBSA is doing locally? And then, as I said earlier, active, mutually beneficial community partnerships, which are a foundation to a long-term, sustainable relationship that you can build with BIPOC communities. Next.
So for BIPOC communities, every group has a preference of what social media they use and what different outlets they like. So it's important to recognize that in order to avoid spreading any misinformation or promoting any, or to reduce stigma, is to find out which forms of communication each or certain cultures do use the most, to make sure those messages align with those communities. Social media is a critical tool for communicating, sharing info, building networks, and building community. So in order to use social media in a way that is effective, you need to be able to have a list, whether it's someone that you had find it or something on Google. You can search up a lot of information about BIPOC communities to see which platforms each community uses, or if there's an overlap of communities using a single platform. For example, Black and Hispanic communities are more likely to use Facebook than white users, while African Americans are more likely to use Instagram rather than their white or Hispanic counterparts. Another thing that we've actually started doing is connecting to the BIPOC, to different BIPOC communities by connecting with social media influencers, or they call themselves mental health advocates. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for our social media BIPOC influencer outreach plan, here is a list of almost checkboxes that I use in order to find people who I think would be a good fit with DBSA. I say micro influencers, which means around 12K and higher likes. Their content should be about living with a mood disorder, being a BIPOC advocate, racial disparities in the mental health community, finding access, advocacy with government. All those things usually help us connect really well with BIPOC community, just because we already have that mission, like the same mission. And then when reaching, engagement rate. So engagement is what you use to find out how many people are sharing, commenting, or liking your social media content. So something we like to look at is engagement rate. And if they have an engagement rate of 3% to 5%, that usually is really, really well. It's a lot of math that it's involved in finding engagement rate. So really all it is that you have to look is their profile, their followers, and if the amount of likes and comments and shares that they have makes sense for the amount of followers they have, that's usually a good sign. If they have like 100,000 followers, but 2 likes on every post and 1 comment, that's probably a red flag. And then when you reach out to these influencers, it's important to be very personable. We don't want to come off as a company being like, we want you to talk about your issues. It's more, we as an organization, we see you and we want you to be part of us and what we're doing, build that community, and talk about their online presence as an individual rather than you're just another individual who's an influencer. Talk about how we really enjoyed that you talked about distrust in the mental health world with like doctors, and then move into how you want to partner with them and so on. That's it for me.
In addition to social media presence, you don't want to forget about earned media, traditional media presence. The impact of, let's say, targeted media in terms of being a stability and a symbol of trust within BIPOC communities has been long known and long recognized. And so you want to consider media relations that focuses on targeted media in your community with relevant messaging that also takes place within a credible editorial environment. Consider, if you're interested in reaching out to the Black community, consider an op-ed piece or trying to place stories within Black newspapers or even Black radio. Consider Spanish language radio and newspapers as another source for messaging to talk about DBSA in partnership with other organizations, perhaps sponsoring a health fair in your community, or perhaps getting a DBSA chapter representative as a guest on a local radio talk show to talk about mental health care issues. So the targeted media is, again, a foundation for trust and credibility, and you should also keep them in mind. I've mentioned a couple of other examples, but also offer, for example, PSAs, Spanish language PSAs that you might consider running during Hispanic Heritage Month or another part of the year. How about, again, an article or byline column that you issue to a local community newspaper during BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month, or offering a first-person account of the value of support groups that is offered during Black History Month for a Black radio station or a newspaper. So these are just some of the ideas to keep in mind in terms of how to partner with targeted media in your community. Next.
So let's briefly talk about some of those examples of outreach in your action plan, right? So Karen and Kevin went over how to do it, but what does that actually look like? What are the tangible elements of it, right? So flyers that can, if you're running a specialized support group, like a Black community support group or a Hispanic community support group, or a rural community support group, you can develop flyers that speak to that audience, right? Infographics, so specific stats and case studies and whatever else are specific to that audience you can develop too, posters and brochures. The important thing to remember here is that if you are aiming for a specific audience, representation matters, but ultimately you want to make sure that what you're creating and what you're putting out is culturally competent and isn't seen as pandering. We'll talk a little bit more about how to avoid some of those pitfalls. But for now, I'll show you how Dbsa goes about how we do it when we put stuff on social media and or in flyers. So you can see here for BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month, right? We have representation where we're using hands, which is part of the Dbsa brand guide, but these hands feature more hands of people in the BIPOC community. When you have our July, it's BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. Again, a lot of representation there. We made sure that we picked images and stuff that depicted the community that we wanted to attract. And then over there on the far end, we have a Dbsa Presents I'm Here. Same thing with the hands. Again, Dbsa uses hands a lot in our communication, but we want to make sure that this was going up, I believe, in a church, I believe. And so we wanted to make sure we picked imagery and language even that matched the audience that we were trying to reach there. As we talk about community partnerships, Kevin mentioned this. This is probably where you're going to make your biggest impact. And Dbsa isn't telling you to do anything that we don't do ourselves. So Dbsa finds community partners to reach out to audiences that we may not have traditionally reached in the past. So it's a vital tool. One thing Kevin touched on is you can look at your census data and see where the needs are. One thing is you don't want to create or you don't want to spend time making messaging or content for an audience that isn't there, right? So understanding the demographics that are around you and the needs and gaps that are around you are very important. Census data that can help you do that. You also may be familiar with the community leaders in your community, but you may not have talked to them one-on-one. And so just the value of scheduling those one-on-one meetings with a church leader, with a community organizer, and seeing where your local chapter or affiliate can fit in is another thing that is super invaluable when you're trying to make inroads into a community that you haven't traditionally talked to. You probably understand that, hey, in my community, there is a need to give mental health resources out to the Asian community, but I don't know how to do that. But maybe you know that there's a mental health fair handled by the Chamber of Commerce, right? Or handled by another entity in your community that speaks directly to that community. So all you have to do is, get your email together, introduce yourself. Karen showed you how to do a DM for influencers. Use those tools to get that initial meeting, conference call, what have you, to reach out to that specific audience. You want to make sure when you're reaching out to them, though, that it's not a waste of their time and it's not a waste of your time. So if you are going to reach out to a community leader or influencer, you need to make sure you understand their priorities. What is their main goal? Is their main goal to get more people back to their community center? Is it to make sure they get as many resources as possible? And make sure that that matches up with or matches closely with the goal that you're trying to do, right? So if you do understand that, hey, this specific population is missing mental health resources and my DBSA local chapter or support group can provide that, where is the synergy? Make sure that you find it. In-person meetings, conference calls, Zoom calls, those are the best, although you can do this via email. Creating an agenda for said meeting, super important. I learned that a lot this year. Making agendas will make things go way more smoothly. Just go ahead and outline those priorities, like I said, and figuring out where it's mutually beneficial. And then I touched on this. Getting cooperation from your faith leaders. Going into a barbershop, a grocery store, a hair salon, what have you. You're trying to reach that community. Go in and make friends, so to speak. And then you can demonstrate the value of your DBSA chapter or local support group to them, and then hopefully make a partnership. We'll talk a little more about what that actually looks like. So when you're meeting, say, because things can get ethereal, right? Say there's a health fair, right, that you really want your DBSA chapter to be part of, but you don't know how to go about it, right? But you know that DBSA should be there. So how do we do this? Well, one, as I alluded to earlier, if you know the organizer of that health fair, oftentimes we find out that those organizers do need an entity to provide mental health resources. Now, DBSA, we offer plenty of posters, flyers, and brochures that you can use if you're setting up a booth at those places, right? So letting that organizer know, hey, I can provide mental health resources. DBSA Grand Forks can offer mental health resources at this community organization, at this health fair, right? But you also want to make sure that this is formal. You want to draw up a partnership agreement with said community organizer or organization, right? So you want to make sure you understand their mission, and you want to make sure they understand DBSA's mission and your mission of your local chapter. You want to make sure that roles and responsibilities are clearly outlined, right? So if you're supposed to be there at a certain time with a certain number of flyers or information to give out, if you're supposed to reshare and retweet information about the fair a number of times, if you're supposed to mention it in the newsletter a number of times, make sure you know when that stuff is supposed to be shared, what time you're supposed to be somewhere, and who in your organization is the liaison between that community organization and your local DBSA chapter / support group. And then make sure you get out a timeline. This helps everybody become organized and allows you to make sure that you are on schedule when getting this information together. You want to track your progress via agreed upon metrics. DBSA does this a lot with all our partners. Oftentimes we will agree to share something to our audience and they will agree to share something to their audience. One of the most valuable things that you have, if you are a chapter or a support group, is your email list, right? And so, or your social media following. And so sharing information, mutually agreeing to share information about things is a good inroads to having another organization partner with you. You may, again, not be able to reach out to the Asian community, but this organization can, and you're able to reshare and retweet their information, and vice versa. They're able to do it for your DBSA chapter. You want to define what success looks like for you. I'm going to say an example. I don't recommend this example, but it's the one that's coming to my head. You can offer, hey, we will put the CTA, the call to action, in our newsletter to sign up for the mental health fair, and we guarantee that 50 people will sign up. They will say, we'll mention your chapter or your support group at our news blast, our email blast, and we can guarantee, 20 people will sign up for your email list. I don't recommend getting that granular because that can get a little tricky, but I'm sure you can get the idea, something of that. How many opens, how many people reached and served is what you want to focus on. And make sure it's reasonable in that timeline that we talked about above. Lastly, I talked about creating that content that you saw, those examples, those 3 examples. One thing when dealing with communities of color is you never want to come off as pandering to that community. It's an easy way to shut yourself out. So if they see that DBSA Grand Forks is coming to the Asian American community with information that they believe is pandering, or that you're not taking them seriously, or you just did this because it's the flavor of the week, then you will never be able to talk to that community again, or it'll be very hard. But by partnering with a community group, a community organization, a local influencer, someone there, they will help you, or they should help you, put this in your partnership agreement. They will be able to help you develop culturally competent materials for your specialized groups, if that's what you're doing, or help you with translating information sometimes, help you with developing more flyers and more brochures that community needs that DBSA National may not have a scope on just yet. So working with that community, working with those community organizations to develop new content so you're not pandering is very important.
So now that Dante has explained some of the broad foundational ideas around community partnership, we want to share with you some specific ideas that you might consider incorporating into your outreach plan. Next. These are some specific ideas for you to consider, and this all comes under the umbrella of community partnerships. Some you know, some perhaps you don't know, but for example, town halls. Participating as a panelist or a speaker at a town hall is a very good way to not only gain that visibility, but gain the credibility in front of the community itself, as DBSA and its chapter representatives can speak to mental health issues, can speak to the needs of peers face to face with other individuals, and take time to also answer questions. Health fairs, another excellent opportunity for us to distribute information and talk with individuals one-on-one to really to explain our mission, why we're there, what's important to us, and how DBSA would like to help. Community events is another way of also having a large visibility in a credible way with a BIPOC community. Karen talked a lot about social media, which once you're successful in finding the proper social media channels to have a voice on that channel to share amongst other BIPOC voices in a discussion about mental health and the needs of peers is an excellent way to raise visibility and gain credibility at the same time. Let's share our knowledge. As an organization that's the preeminent peer-focused mental health organization in the country, you have an opportunity to share that knowledge on your level in a lot of different settings. Healthcare conferences, for example. If you're successful in partnering with another community-based organization that's doing a conference or some sort of symposium on mental health, why not suggest a DBSA chapter member as a speaker to give either a keynote or to be on a panel? Or why not offer our expertise for local initiatives addressing mental health care, whether it's a community board or some sort of commission looking at how to improve services and resources who need it in the area of mental health? Why not offer chapter representatives and chapter resources to contribute to that initiative? As always, we have our support groups for which DBSA is so known for across the country. And if you're able to open up locally a support group for identity focused groups, that's a very strong opportunity. Or if you're able to talk about the online support groups for culture and identity focused groups that we currently run, this is an opportunity to talk those up as well to constituents in your community. And obviously, there's opportunities to take the materials that have already been created by our national office, or you perhaps have some materials at the chapter level, and to offer those in additional languages beyond English, whether it's Spanish or Mandarin Chinese or other opportunities like that. Again, another opportunity to make that sort of special and credible connection with the BIPOC audience that you seek to partner with. Next.
So we just said a lot, right? We walked you through an audience, we walked you through how to reach out, and we gave you some tips and tricks, right? But that was a bunch of information. And so one thing that Dbsa has developed in the this past year is this DEI toolkit, where it goes more in depth on what you can do when you are trying to reach specific populations, right? One thing in there that is very important that you can use is there are sample partnership agreements in there between you and another organization that you can use and tailor for your resources. There's also a provided template that you can use for a letter of introduction to another organization. And it's on the Dbsa. It's on the Dbsa. It has a Dbsa header on it so that it looks more official and like it's coming from an organization, legitimate organization. There's also tips and tricks in there for exactly how you want to outline and track your progress and how you want to conduct outreach and best create your marketing plan. So you can find this very easily by just hovering over the support group tab on the website and clicking on Dbsa chapters and support groups. Once you're on that chapters and support group page, if you scroll down, right at the bottom is the link to the DEI toolkit. Again, I encourage you to go in there, look at those sample plans, look at the organization, or look at the groups that we have identified. It's a non-exhaustive list, right? So Dbsa is going back all the time to update those lists. We just have to make sure we have the resources and we want to make sure we have the resources and develop culturally competent information before we offer it to you to say, hey, go reach out to this, like, the unhoused community, right? Dbsa wants to work with someone to help us develop that information before we put it on our website. But in the meantime, it is there, and please use it. There are a few questions here. There was a question around we aren't allowed to share our chapter email list because attendance is confidential. How do we deal with this? So Dbsa, full disclosure, we don't share our email list with anyone either, right? Dbsa sends emails on the only people sending emails on behalf of Dbsa is Dbsa. But what we do instead is we will mention a resource. So say it's a mental health fair, right? We may mention that resource in our newsletter and report the clicks, right? The click-through rate back to our partner. And that's how you demonstrate that value. So they're being advertised to, quote unquote, they're being advertised to the mental health fair, and then those stats we're providing back to our partner, but never individual emails. I would never suggest that you do that. Another way too is to, sometimes you send out single focus emails, especially if you're going to be at a mental health fair. You can send out a single focus email to your group to say, hey, mental health fair is happening here next week. Dbsa will have a booth. Come join us. That's another way to get around actually sharing your email list out with the outside person or outside entity. Again, I would never recommend that. Vivian asked about the unhoused community. We hear you, Vivian. Absolutely. DBSA is in the process of developing more and more information and materials for other groups that fall under our DEI initiative. This is non-exhaustive. Every group isn't going to be here, but we're working very hard.
See, Lene has this question regarding, can you provide insight on how facilitators can effectively introduce the partnership between Polaris and DBSA and share information about the study?
That's an interesting question. Because facilitators are conducting support groups, right? And so they have that messaging beforehand where they can provide links back to the study. I'm not, this Lene, forgive me, I'm not 100% positive on how much you can say before a support group starts. But I know you can provide links and other information to your support group before it begins. But yeah, that's a good question. And I actually, Lene, Kevin and I will touch base and we'll email you about how we want facilitators to highlight that partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for us? One of the DBSA staff, Kimberly, actually said that facilitators can work with their chapter leaders for guidance on the Polaris and DBSA partnership as well. Thank you, Kimberly.
Are there any questions about, for example, how to approach community-based organizations? Or if within your chapter region, if you have community-based organizations in mind that you'd like to approach, and you have a question about how to break the ice, so to speak, we'd love to be able to help if you wanted to offer a question right now.
Well, if there's no further questions, you can always email us at media@dbsalliance.org. I again encourage everybody to take a look at the DEI toolkit and familiarize yourself with that. And look at that sample partnership agreement and look at that sample outreach letter. Also, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint so you can look at Karen's direct message that she sent out to an influencer. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.